With that, my name's Jeff Miller. I'm the marketing rep for Kansas. I'm also the marketing manager for the Southern region. We're going to be going through the 2026 PRF changes. And changes is an aggressive term. It's really more than anything. It's many clarifications, one big change, I guess, but a lot of it is just clarifications. They did add some examples this year, which is very nice, something that they did in the annual Forage a couple of years ago. We've got several very good examples in here today. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Please make sure you are on mute. One more time, I am going to mute everybody just before I get started here, just to clean it up. And with that, yeah, like I said, this training, it will be available. They'll get a PRF training suite out there with a lot of good information. It'll probably be out into this week, first of next week, that will be available after this. The presentation, this recording, Mark's recording, we also have pre-recorded the keying training. It's already available, and it will be put with this, and the keying, really no changes from last year. So all of that will be put together in a training suite, made available, like I said, into this week, first of next week. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started here. PRF, what is it? This is a single peril lack of rainfall product. That's what PRF is. It is ensuring, like I said, against a single peril lack of rainfall. We do get the information from NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The data does go back to 1948. What I do encourage my agents to do is make sure that you're kind of talking to your insureds about, what cycle are they in? Different parts of the country have different weather patterns. I know just where I live, where me and Mark live, the weather today is certainly different than it was when we were growing up. So like I said, go back as far as you want. However you handle your PRF is fine. There's not really a wrong answer, I guess. But I would encourage you to talk to your insureds about the weather pattern that they're in. Just weather does change. Rainfall data is pre-processed by NOAA. RMA does not further process or change the data. PRF is available in all 48 contiguous states as well as Hawaii. Me and Mark keep trying to get Jay to let us go down there and try to sell a little bit, but so far he has not been on board with that decision. PRF does not capture or utilize actual crop production, doesn't cover any other perils. You're going to hear me say this 4 or 5 times a day: single peril, lack of rainfall. It's not drought insurance. It doesn't matter what the drought monitor says. It doesn't matter if it's hot, dry, high temperatures, or windy conditions. It doesn't look at those things. It's single peril, lack of rainfall. We know that you can be D3 on the drought monitor, but if you get all the rain on the last day of an interval, even though it's been dry for 59 days, you got the rainfall that you bought for that particular interval. And I know that can be, some people consider that a downfall of the policy. I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but they do continue to update it, and they are continuing to add rain gauges out there. So they're working through to make it better. It's, like I said, it's better to have something than nothing. It is group-based coverage, concept same as the area plan. And when it says group-based, the area plan looks at counties. This group-based is looking at an approximate 12 by 12 mile grid. And we're looking at the normal rainfall in those grids. And when I talk about normal rainfall, people are like, well, I'm buying 90% coverage, but I'm buying 90% of what? Well, we have those rainfalls. Mark Driskell will go through those later, where you can look up by grid, by interval, and look those up in our system in a couple different places and get that percentage of rainfall that you're buying for that particular interval. Mark will go over those later. We've hit on this already. It's single peril, lack of rainfall. There's no APH. We're not going to look at any production. We're not going to look at the farmer if he's recording all the rainfall. We're not going to look at that. The application, acreage report, and lease agreements are all due by September 1. Now, or September 1, and I apologize. December 1 is due by December 1. Now, I'm going to say December 1 multiple times through this training, but your keying timelines apply. If you get 30 days to do your acreage reports, timely printed, timely signed, that's what I mean when I say December 1, and then you get your 30 days. But I'm going to say December 1 multiple times just to keep from saying December 1 plus whatever time you get. But timely printed, timely signed, you remember that. But the date in the actuarials is going to say December 1. Coverage levels run 70 to 90%. Productivity factors are 60 to 150%, and you can move those in 1% increments. Those county-based values are given to us by RMA, by crop, by county, by practice. And I would look into these a little bit in that if you want a little more coverage, you can buy up closer to that 150%. Or if you want to spend a little less, or maybe not looking for quite that much coverage, you can buy down closer to the 60. You can move it in 1% increments. The grid, this is the area type that comes in. This is that approximate 12 by 12 mile grid. This is in lieu of section, township, and range. How do we get those grids? They're overlaid by longitude and latitude lines. Those lines don't move, so it's not like 1 year it's over here and 1 year it's over here. They have kept those longitude and latitude lines in the same place. Cannot ensure any acreage planted or acquired after the acreage reporting date. That's pretty self-explanatory. Something that we'll hit on quite a few times through the day is that, there's no revisions to a PRF acreage report. Once you turn it in, you're kind of locked into that information. I've mentioned single peril, lack of rainfall. Those on the left side there are just additional perils that it doesn't cover because it's single peril. The subsidies are there on the right if you want to look through those. Like I said, you can see what the subsidies are at different coverage levels. Contract change date for PRF is August 31st. Sales closing date, cancellation termination date, and acreage reporting date are all December 1. Premium billing September 1. So we're past, interest was attached on October 1 of this month. So like I said, that's for 2020. If you have any 2025 premiums still outstanding, I would be getting those cleaned up. Like I said, contract change dates coming up, or the cancellation dates coming up on December 1. We do have two different types, grazing, and this is used solely as pasture for livestock to roam and feed on. When we say livestock, in my head, I always think cattle, but that's not the case. They give a listing of them, and I know they added buffalo here a few years ago. So I need to make sure, and I watch myself when we're thinking livestock, sheep, goats, buffalo, like I said, cattle, obviously, but they're, make sure that we're taking that into account. But grazing is intended for use by grazing by livestock. It's got to be suitable for the cause, meaning it can't be so steeply sloped or so far from a water source that it could not be grazed. Haying is defined as severance of the plant from its roots by mechanical equipment and cured. Once again, it comes into play suitable for the practice, meaning it can't be submerged by water, or I think 2 years ago, so covered by cacti that it can't be mechanically harvested. And these are things that we need to take into account. Haying can be further broken down as irrigated and non-irrigated. But these are the two types. And just remember that it's got to be suitable for. It's not necessarily that's exactly what you do. If you get in a drought situation or get in a rain situation and you need to switch, if you put it as haying, but you need to graze it, as long as it's, suitable for the practice, these are things that are allowed by the policy. You can go into the actuarials and look them up and look up the different types that are available. This is out in the actuarials. Haying, irrigated, non-irrigated. You can have different coverage levels here. So if you have grazing, you can have 90%. If you have haying, you can have 80%. If you have irrigated and non-irrigated haying, you can have 85 and 75%. The thing to remember is this, that you have different ground for each one of these practices. You can't mix and match the same ground. You would have to have enough ground to be able to break it down, and then you could have these different coverage levels. The other thing is you'll break these down into different insurance intervals. And these intervals cannot overlap. We'll go over those a little bit more here in a little bit. This is just kind of how it would look on the application if you're breaking it down by haying and grazing, and if you're breaking haying down by irrigated and non-irrigated, just kind of showing you the different productivity factors that you can have and the different coverage levels, provided that you have enough ground to break it out in that manner. This kind of goes over the grid. We talked about the approximate 12 by 12 mile grid that's overlaid by longitude and latitude lines. Now, if you want to get scientific about it, the closer you get to the equator, due to the curvature of the Earth, it gets to approximately 17 by 17 miles at the equator. What you kind of need to understand here is that a grid is bigger in Louisiana than it's going to be in North Dakota. This is just kind of showing that grids don't follow county lines or state lines, or as we talk a little later, international borders or oceans. It doesn't take those into account. The lines were overlaid and, there's nothing that we can see on the ground. Like we mentioned it several times, they're overlaid by longitude and latitude lines. And that's just kind of a visual reference to that right here. We haven't talked yet about points of reference. Points of reference must be on each non-contiguous piece of ground on the policy, and then also by practice. And that's kind of what this slide is illustrating here. If you have grazing and haying on the policy, you would thus have 2 points of reference. Expected grid indexes. This is the information, the amount of rainfall expressed as a percentage. And this is kind of what's saying. You have a trigger index, which if you buy the 90% coverage level, that's your trigger. And then if the information that comes from NOAA, it comes out less than 90, then it could trigger an indemnity. And that's kind of what it's showing here. You can go out to RMA's website and you can see here that in February, March, it came out at 0.2730. Obviously, this is less than the 90% coverage level, and it kind of works through the math there of how a payment would would be generated. Insureds must allocate their acres as a percent of value. You know, on a multi-peril policy, if they plant 100 acres of corn, you go on there and you pick the unit and you put 100 acres of corn on the acreage report. That's not how we do it on the PRF policies. You do it as a percent of value. And so meaning if you have 100 acres, then you can take always the minimum is 10%. You can't put less than 10% of the acres in any one interval. And then there are varying maximums. You can see here, they kind of broke out a couple of states, Nebraska and Kansas can have a maximum of 60 by interval. South Dakota, North Dakota 70, North Carolina, South Carolina is 50%. Make sure you're checking your state. You know, the quota is going to take it into account, but just make sure that you're checking your state to see what the maximums are, with the minimum always being 10%. The index intervals, this is the mini insurance periods is kind of what they call them. This is the 2-month intervals. There's always a minimum. You got to be in a minimum of 2 intervals. The maximum is 11. You know, there's 11 different combinations. The max that you're going to be able to get into is 6. Simply because even in Blue Mountain math, 12 divided by 2 is 6. So with the 2-month intervals, that'll be the max that you will be able to get into. County-based values, we talked about this one a little bit ago. These are the values that RMA attributes by practice, by county, by state. So make sure you're going in and checking these. You can look these up. They're in the actuarials. You know, if you see your coverage go up or down, or premium go up or down, RMA may have adjusted the county-based values. This is information that they give to us as an industry. And this is where that 60 to 150% productivity factor comes into play, in that if you in Kansas for grazing in Barton County, if you'd like more than $44.50, you can buy up that productivity factor and up to 150% of that number, or down if you would like a little less. So that's kind of how you can adjust premium, you can adjust coverage, however you utilize it in your agency. These are the options that are available there. But just kind of be aware that the county-based values are different by county, by crop, by practice, and they are available in the actuarials. We've hit on the productivity factor a couple of times already, 60 to 150%. You can move it up or down in 1% intervals, in 1% increments. Application requirements. The application is available out on the website. Name of the crops, PRF, plan of insurance is rainfall, coverage levels run 70 to 90%, productivity factors are 60 to 150. Your intended use is going to be haying or grazing. You can list the grid IDs, you get the index intervals, you got to be in at least 2 of those. Percent of value has to equal up to 100%. The disclaimer is now part of the application and must be submitted. Why the disclaimer? Because it is a group type policy. You are allowing for that to be group and not on your individual ground. Here's an application example. If you want to reference back to this, I would certainly, like I said, this presentation is available. You can come back here, kind of work through how you're adding the coverage levels, the productivity factor, what types you're using, the grid IDs, and then the percents of value. These are all here available, kind of how you would fill out the application here. Your acreage reports must have the share, the practice, the intended use, the points of reference. That's going to be, we do have those automated now, but they must be physically on the acreage report. Jenny will show you that in the already recorded team training, how we have automated points of reference. But do know that those have to be illustrated on the acreage report, on the signed acreage report. You'll get your grid ID here, your land identifiers. You know, this is a map policy, so you've got your farm track and field numbers. And you do have to have verifiable records. We're going to hit on this a little bit more later, basically showing control of the ground. You've got insurable acres versus insured acres. For PRF, kind of like annual forage, these are one of the few policies where you don't have to insure all of the ground available. You know, if you have corn and you put a seed of corn in the ground and corn is on the policy in that county, every acre has to be on the policy. PRF and annual forage are a little different. In that PRF, if you have 1,000 acres and you say, you know, I only want to insure 500, your insurable acres is 1,000 because that's what you have access to. But your insured acres could only need be 500, and it doesn't have to be half. It's whatever number that you want. There is no minimum number of acres that must be insured under PRF, except for, bottom sentence here, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada have a minimum acreage of 60 contiguous acres. So they start at 60 contiguous acres. And then if you have that, if you can prove that, then you can move up from there and build your PRF policy. But kind of be aware of that. Arizona, Utah, and Nevada does have a minimum of 60 contiguous acres. Not required to insure the 100% of the acres. That's what we just kind of got going through there the slide before, we've got grazing and haying types. Cannot ensure the same acreage with an intended use of haying and grazing in the same year. So just kind of be aware of that. You can't use the first half of the year in grazing and then take that ground and turn around and put it haying in the second half of the year. It doesn't work like that. You only get to use the ground one time a year. Now, it doesn't say that this year you graze it and next year you turn around and be like, I'm going to hay it, and you want to switch it. That is okay if you do different crop years. But within the same crop year, you cannot utilize the same piece of ground more than one time. You cannot have PRF haying and APH plan the forage production on the same acres. You can't have annual forage and PRF on the same acres in the same crop year. So just kind of things to be aware of. You're not going to get to use the ground more than once. Just kind of be aware of that. Acres not insurable if grazing, if it's so steeply sloped or so far from a water source that animals would normally graze. Haying, if it's so steeply sloped or covered by water, or I mentioned it earlier, covered by cacti or trees or rocks that it cannot be mechanically harvested. It's just kind of one of those, just kind of be aware of the ground. It does need to be suitable for the practice. You cannot insure acreage acquired after the acreage reporting date. Talked about that kind of already. There's not going to be any revisions. Get the question of, well, what happened? How if I'm seeding some ground down, when does it have to be seeded by in 2025, the calendar year we're in, so that I can insure it on PRF 2026? It would need to be seeded before July 1st of 2025 to be insurable on PRF for 2026. Now, depending on what you're doing, maybe if you need to get through the first year, if after July 1st, maybe an annual forage policy would come into play. That's up to you depending on the situation. This one right here in the middle is a big one. This next one, any crop reported to a USDA agency as a cover crop. This is really getting to be a problem. And you'll notice this because RMA has added this same language to PRF, annual forage, and the multi-peril. People keep trying to put it on both, and RMA is starting to lose their sense of humor about this. So we need to be paying attention to this. If they're reporting it as USDA as a cover crop, don't put it anywhere else. And by anywhere else, I mean anywhere else. Like I said, RMA is looking at this, they're watching this, and not only are you not going to get any indemnities, or maybe have to pay back possible indemnities, you're going to be required to pay 60% of the premium as a penalty so that they'll pay more attention next time. So please take that into account. Land is not insurable. If you don't have control of the ground, guys, we know this. Lease certifications. Sorry, I'm going to pause here for a second. Please make sure you're staying on mute. I just need to hit this. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. And then the requirement, and we're going to go over this a little more, is a requirement that you have to have leases or lease certification forms on hand by the acreage reporting date. We're going to hit on that a little bit more. That's the big change this year, and we'll hit on that a little bit more here in a second. A clarification that came out this spring as for PRF was first crop, second crop. There was some discrepancies on how this was supposed to apply, but we did get clarifications this spring, and it did come into play for 2025 PRF. And basically, if you decide to change your use of the crop or use of the ground, tear it up or put it to another use, whatever the situation may be, first crop, second crop for PRF will come into play. No different than for what you would know about first crop, second crop from a multi-peril standpoint, just substituting in PRF. And like I said, just a really good flow chart to print off, keep it hand laminated, keep it on your desk, just something to look back to. But just knowing that PRF and first crop, second, if you put the land to another use, first crop, second crop will come into play. When you're setting up a PRF unit, units are broken out by crop, intended use, the interval, share, irrigated practice, whether it's organic practice in the county. Point of reference functionality, we do have the ability to use, RMA is now allowing us to use our mapping software to put out the points of reference. Like I said, Jenny's going to reference that in our keying training. Just make sure that it is physically on the acreage report. That is the big deal. It's not about just hitting the button in Easy Writer Pro. You need to get it on the signed acreage report as well. Point of reference reminders, like I said, must be on the acreage report. That's really what we got there. Sold or leased ground. I'm going to kind of give a broad statement right here. I said it earlier, RMA has done a good job of giving us examples, and they did this I think 2 years ago in annual forage. They give us there's like 6 or 7 of these examples that don't cover them all. We know all of us are going to have our individual examples that we need to come in and look at. But those 6 examples that they gave us on annual forage cover about 90% of the scenarios that are out there. And that's really what they've done this year in PRF. There are no less than 10 examples that I'm going to overview right now. but they are spread out throughout this presentation. They're very good examples. Get this presentation, keep it close at hand. Like I said, I feel like they're going to cover most of the situations out there. And then when you get your one off, get with your marketing rep and your compliance and underwriter, and we'll work through that particular situation. But with those examples, the mindset is still the same. And that mindset is, if you put the ground to another use, you tear it up, you put it to another use, but it's your decision as the insured. You decided to do something different with the ground. You can have all the indemnities up to and into any interval that you enter into before you tear it up. You can have all those indemnities, but no matter what, you are going to pay 100% of the premium, and any intervals after you tear it up, you'll no longer be eligible for indemnities in. The other scenario, the other side of the mindset is, it was outside of the insured's control. The landowner pulled it away, or there could be another situation. And provided you can get third-party documentation, the landowner, you can't, as the insured, write a letter. You as the agent can't write a letter and say, well, it was taken away from them. That's not going to suffice. We're going to need a third party, i.e. the owner, is going to have to write some saying, yes, I took the ground away from Mark to do something different with it. And in that case, then you could be eligible, depending on the situation and your documentation, you could be eligible for all the indemnities for the entire year. And as always, you will pay 100% of the premium. And that's kind of, like I said, there are many other scenarios in here that you are welcome to come back and read, but just for time's sake, I don't want to spend time reading them all to you. Destroyed acres, and that's what this is talking about. Like I said, if you're destroying the ground, if it's your decision, you get any interval that has passed or you entered into, losing any indemnities going forward from that one. Here's a simplified example of a PRF claim payment, just showing that they chose two grids. They decided to divide the ground evenly. They had 90% coverage level, productivity factor at 120%, 1,000 acres, county base values 42, dollar amount of protection. You can see it's a little higher than 42 because they bought 120% of the productivity factor. They bought up their protection. And this just kind of works through what RMA released the data. One of them came in at over 90 and not generating a payment. One came in at under 90, and it works through the math on how that would have generated a claims payment. PRF technology here. This is just talking about the range stations. And for those of you that have been around a long time, like I said, you kind of maybe grown up with the policy. I remember that in this slide talked about there only being 3,000 reporting stations. Now there's over 6,000 reporting stations. That being said, there's still not one in every grid. And that's kind of where some, not discrepancies, but unrest, whatever word you kind of want to use there, maybe comes into play. Is they're like, well, I have a rain gauge in my grid and it did not rain, and yet you're telling me I had rain. Well, no matter what, when they are assessing the amount of rainfall, they're going to use 4 reporting stations daily for that day. Every single time they're going to use 4 reporting stations, and they might not always be the same 4 reporting stations. So please kind of keep that in mind, because maybe there's one in yours where it didn't rain, but it rained in the other 3. So like I said, is this a perfect system? I'm not saying that it is, but it is a system that we have today, and it is a system that is being utilized. So being mad about it when we know about it up front kind of defeats the purpose. So they do use the Cressman methodology. They're using 4 reporting stations every single time, and they interpolate what happens in any one grid. So that's kind of something just to kind of keep in mind when you're working through this. Oh, one other thing I want to hit on. Right there in the center, it talks about when's the cutoff time. And we all have seen it where on the last day of an interval, it hasn't rained for 59 days. And on the last day of an interval, it comes in and rains. Well, how long are they going to keep taking that information in? It stops at 8:55 p.m. Eastern time. So if it happens after that time frame, it will not be reflected in that particular interval. So that's something that they put out there a couple years ago, and something that does come into play. I think we've all probably seen it happen at one time or another. Reporting stations, here's a website that you can go to. I've had agents call me back and be like, man, I couldn't get to anything here, but I found some more here, but I can't find them all. I just don't understand why I can't find them all. Here's the answer to your question. People suck, and they're never going to give them all to us. They're simply not. For whatever reason, people feel the need to mess with the gauges, to go out and do things, like I said, and try to mess with the information. RMA simply is never going to give us all of them. I've seen several different websites that give some of them, but never one that gives them all. And so that's the answer to that question. You can search until you're blue in the face, but I do not believe you're ever going to find them all. And there is very good reason for that. NOAA data changes. This is one that people call, agents have called at different times, and they're just like, there's just no way that this is right. What can we do? Not a lot is the answer to your question. NOAA at times will change their data used in the rainfall programs after RMA has published the final numbers. If RMA is notified by NOAA, not by an agent, not by an insured, but if they're notified by NOAA that there was an error in the data that RMA published within 1 year of the date, if it's 2 years out, nobody's going to look at it. But if it's within 1 year of the date, the RMA administrator will then determine if the change is warranted. So I'm not saying you have no way to get it changed, but I will say it's a very limited way. The final grid index is not appealable either. So like I said, once it comes out, like I said, it'll be between RMA and NOAA. Just some things to kind of be aware of as you enter into the policy. This slide I always like to look at, the PRF summary of business. This is an industry slide that talks about the increased participation in the program. You can see in 2016, a little over 25,000 policies sold. In 2025, almost 79,000 policies sold. Agents are always talking to us, when we're out on the road, how do we grow our book of business? How do we continue to expand in this market? PRF and livestock, in my opinion, like I said, take that for what it's worth, are two places where there's a lot of unbranded cattle running around and a lot of opportunity. And I think this slide reflects that, showing the increases in policies, the increases in the acreage covered, and that is working for the producer. You can see there in 20, 21, 22, like I said, losses. We know how dry those years were. 23 wasn't great, kind of coming back around here in 24, and hopefully 25 stays the course. But just an interesting slide that kind of talks about the growth of the program. This slide reflects it in line chart format, just kind of showing you the increase of the acres in the program. This slide here, kind of something to just bear in mind, SDRP, not our policy, but I guarantee all of us have talked about it at one time in the last 6 months. It just kind of is one of those things. The main reason this slide is on here is just to kind of understand that for SDRP and the ERP before that, nothing having to do with grazing. So if you only have grazing, you can stare at the ceiling for a little bit. But if you have haying and your people received an SDRP payment for haying, they signed something that said they would keep crop insurance coverage on it for 2 years. That crop insurance coverage is reflected here on your PRF. So PRF is the answer to getting that SDRP hay payment and keeping it. So that's kind of what this slide's talking about. If they got an SDRP payment for hay ground on a PRF policy, they have to keep coverage on that for 2 more years. Down here at the bottom, it kind of talks about annual forage. If you received it on annual forage hay ground, once again, if you got that payment, you got to keep coverage for 2 years, but it's only for PRF haying losses and annual forage losses associated with haying. If anything was under grazing, you didn't receive a payment for it, and you don't have to worry about it. But just kind of something to keep in mind, something that to talk to your insureds about and say, hey, if you receive this, you are required to have coverage for 2 years. You did sign something. So if you want to keep that money, you should keep this policy. How the provisions in the handbooks work. And I know that sometimes there's a little confusion that an agent calls in and they have a question. They're like, well, man, I found this in the handbook. You're right, but it actually breaks down in this handbook as well. And so what we have is, this is just kind of a slide to talk about kind of the order of power and what handbooks are out there for the PRF, for the rainfall policies. We have the rainfall index common policy basic provisions, but then each policy has their own provisions. Annual forage has them, agriculture has them, PRF has them. And so it's just kind of one of those things that they each have their own handbook. And then we have the rainfall index insurance standards handbook. Whenever anything goes awry, just add a handbook. It'll make it easier, I promise. But anyways, down here at the bottom, the order of precedence is special provisions, crop provisions, and then the basic provisions. And that's kind of the order of power, and that's how we're going to look at it. But it's just kind of one of those things to keep in mind, that there are multiple handbooks that we do have to utilize when we're looking at the policy. And so finding the answer in one does not mean that we have automatically stop there. The basic provisions. This is some of the new stuff we talked about. When I talked about new, I mentioned it earlier. It's also a lot of clarifications, and that's really what this is. Clarifying that the land, you have to be able to verify that you have control of the ground. That's nothing new. That's something we already knew, but they're clarifying, as I said with the examples, additional ways to get this information to us. Clarify that, and there's examples here, the lease doesn't go for the whole year. Maybe it's 90-day grass, like in the Flint Hills, and you got May 1 to August 1. It doesn't have to be for the entire year. Or you only have cattle for a certain time of the year. That's what some of these things are referring to. Do have to have the leases submitted by the acreage reporting date. We're going to go over that here in a little bit. The beginning farmer rancher subsidies to conform with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that is being added in. We got the single payee for assignment of indemnities. And then it clarifies what we're going to have to do if we don't get the lease agreements And that's kind of what that slide's going over. The handbook updates, continuing to talk about procedures and giving us examples, and then clarify grazing permits and added document types for specific agencies issuing grazing permits, along with additional examples. Just a lot of this is really just clarifications, not these monstrous changes, but clarifications of rules we already had, and then give us some examples of those rules so that we can see them play out in real life. Here's one right here. We already knew that if you had contiguous ground that crossed the state line where most of the ground is where you had to insure it. This slide is to clarify it's where most of the contiguous ground is. And this image kind of illustrates that. We're not really looking at the rectangle over to the right. We're only looking at the contiguous ground, and where most of the contiguous ground is located, that is the state where the contiguous ground must be insured. Now, what you do with the triangle will be up to you. You can leave it in state B, or you can keep it with state A where all the contiguous ground is. But this is a clarification. We already knew about contiguous ground, but they added that it is where most of the contiguous ground is located, not where all of the ground is located. This is an NAU announcement that you've already received, and this is going over the leases. This is something that, like I said, everybody's been trying to get their clarifications out and get their interpretation of how this is going to be handled. This was sent out to you. It was communicated to you. It is in the message center on the agent portal. It's also obviously here. If you do your own keying, you are going to have, if you have leases, if you have rental agreements, something from a state college, something from FSA, and you have those lease agreements, by all means, use those. That's what we're going to want to look at. That has all the information that we need. But if you don't have those, you can come in here and you can look at, work with the lease certification form that is provided by us. If you have the lease certification form with the single signature, that will get you through RMA's requirement of having it on file by December 1. It will not clear a review of any kind with only one signature. With that, we're going to have both signatures, landowner and insured. And so that's the way that's going to be. But like I said, the lease certification form is out there. If you have your lease agreements, have those. Probably the biggest difference that I've heard from some other AIPs is you're not going to be sending these into us unless asked for them. You can house them. That's the way you house your acreage report and your production report. You are going to be housing. We're telling you right now, you need to have them on file. We're also telling you that when we ask for them, you're going to have 7 days to get them to us. If you cannot get them to us within 7 days, there will be no indemnity on the policy at all for the year, but you owe 100% of the premium for the year. So this is something, like I said, this is something that really this fall, this is probably the biggest thing this fall. So if you don't understand this, get with your marketer, get with your underwriter. Like I said, I'm going to try to explain it as plainly as I can, but it is very important that you do have these lease agreements, lease certification forms, whatever they are. You need to have them in your office by December 1. They are supposed to be housed with the acreage report. Currently, we are not asking you to send them in. If you do your own keying, you can house them and we'll ask you for them. You get them to us within 7 days. That is how we're going to handle it. Like I said, utilize your lease certification forms. As far as how long they last, that is up to you. That is up to the lease agreement. What I encourage my people to do is put something on there that says until canceled in writing. That to me is the easiest. Some people won't do that, and that's completely fine. If they roll year to year, next year you have to get another one. But that's going to be kind of how those are looking at. If you have a written lease, obviously those trump any of the lease certification forms and is what that you can use as well. For non-keying agents, if you do not do your processing the same way you send in your acreage report, you must send in the lease certification form or rental agreement with your acreage report. Keying agents, you house them. Non-keying agents, you send them in with your acreage report. Obviously, timely printed, timely signed, December 1. And then you have the 30 days, which is what we already hit on earlier. This is a copy of the lease or print a copy of the lease certification form that's out there and available. If you don't have a lease agreement, something that you can utilize. What they're kind of pointing out here is if you go on RMA's handbook, it only has one signature on it. It does. And that's going to get you through the 7 days, and it's going to get you in compliance with having a lease agreement on file by December 1, by the acreage reporting date. That's what one signature gets you. It gets you halfway there, but it will not get you through any review. To get through a review, you are going to have to enact an actual rental agreement. We, NAU, went ahead and added this second signature so you can get the landlord to sign this, and then it will get through a review and would be acceptable. Also, the other option is that we verbally verify. So in that case, we may reach out and call the landlord. That is a third option. To me, it seems easier to get the signatures, to get the lease agreements early, but I understand not all of this can be done. What I have encouraged my agents to do, if you're not going to get both signatures, get the lease certification. No matter what happens this fall, you're getting an acreage report signed. You're going to be gathering a signature from the insured. You're going to be with them in some manner to gather that signature. So get the lease certification form at least signed by the insured at that time. You're getting one signature. What's the harm in getting two? Now you have the lease certification form on file. It gets you by the 7 days. It gets you by RMA's requirement of having it on file. It will not finish any review, but it's just getting you through step one and giving you some time to get whatever you need to finalize that review. But you, like I said, you are going to be gathering an acreage report. Why not get this signature at the same time? That would be my recommendation. Like I said, nothing that's written down. That's just a thought that I had, so I threw it out to the world. For the intended use of grazing, the insurable interest is based on the percentage of interest in the livestock. This is the way that it's been. So it's something to keep in mind. It's the ownership in the livestock, not the ownership of the ground. You can own the ground, have it in your name, and hand us the deed. But if you only own 50% of the cattle, you only have 50% share in the policy on the ground. That's just the way it is. The 578 is not an acceptable documentation for determining shares or really doing anything with PRF. So you have to have lease agreements showing control of the ground. Deeds will come into play. Deeds help you do it. But like I said, as far as determining shares, 578 is not going to do that. Leases and determining shares. Lease certification form may be used if the lease isn't available. If you have a lease, obviously utilize those. Those are the best thing. Keep your records. That's what they're talking about here. When we're looking at this and we go do a review, we're going to look at 3 years of history. So you're going to have to show us 3 years of ownership of livestock. That's what this is talking about. When we review, we're not just looking at that year. We're going to look at 3 years. So you're going to have to provide livestock records for 3 years in the case of a review. And that's what they're talking about here, is making sure that because your ownership runs through the livestock, that's what they're going to be looking at in a review, is 3 years of ownership in livestock and records showing that. And that's what they're talking about here. It's just to prove that you have owned livestock and that you can prove ownership. RMA will not issue a stocking rate. That's what people have asked. Well, I got 1,000 acres. How many cattle do I have to run? Guys, this is what I do think RMA did good in. They're not going to issue a stocking rate. We know due to the year, the amount of rainfall, the location, the grass, whatever the situation may be, it's just hard to do that for everybody. So they're going to leave that up to you. RMA is not going to issue a stocking rate. So you just have to prove ownership of livestock. Here's some questions. Questions from the AIP. What if the rancher ends up not buying cattle at all due to a drought, which results in the pasture being unable to support livestock? The producer, and the answer from RMA was, got to be able to show supporting documentation that it was due to natural causes. It couldn't be, and this is terrible, but a passing in the family. That's not a naturally occurring event. So, but if the producer can prove that it was a naturally occurring event that kept them from buying cattle, that the land would not support it, and they can document that, that could be a possibility where the insurance would continue. Another question is if an insured has a seasonal lease, and that's kind of what I referenced earlier. You're in the Flint Hills and you got May 1 to August 1. You don't have to have control for the whole year. You have control in the insurance period, which is the calendar year of 2026 in this case, and you own livestock within that time frame. So you can have insurance, and that's what the middle questions talk about. The last question kind of goes to what I said. The rancher doesn't own any cattle January 1, but he's going to own livestock in the calendar year, in the crop year. And that's what this one's talking about. Can he still have insurance? Yes, he can. Assignment of indemnities. Make sure you're listing these out. We go over these same things at the update meetings for multi-peril. Same way here. You can't just put all counties. You have to list out the counties that you want the assignments to be applied to. We can do single payee. They can be digitally signed. Grids crossing the U.S. border. We referenced this earlier, that the longitude and latitude lines do not follow state or county lines. They don't follow international borders, and they don't follow the ocean or anything like that. So if you have a grid ID that crosses over into another country and there's no county-based value for that, you can back up to a reference grid, and that's the county-based value that we'll utilize in that. You'll have to show us that your grid, we'll just have to look at it on case by case. You'll show us that grid doesn't have a county-based value, and then we'll move back to the next closest grid ID. Native sod, for those of you, there are some penalties here for native sod. And the main thing here to remember, if you're in the native sod states, you can see there Iowa, Minnesota, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. If you're in those states, like I said, native sod must be tilled before these provisions apply. So if you're continuing to assure under PRF grazing and it's not tilled, there's no impact. But if you do decide to till native sod ground, there are penalties, and that's what this is going through here. That I apologize here. That and here's some examples here of if native sod comes into play, what the answers would be and how those penalties would be applied. There are 3 types of reviews. You have the over $200,000 reviews. Those are the same wherever you're at in crop insurance. The SRA also requires 3% by policy. So 3% of all the annual forage, 3% of all the PRF, and 3% of all the apiculture by AIP. There is a 3% standard there. And then the review requirements, they're going to focus if there's a policy review or something like that, conflict of interest, whatever the situation may be. Those reviews will all be utilized there, and that's where they're going to come into play, where you're going to need that second signature on the lease certification form or an actual physical rental agreement that has all the information on it, or the verbal release that is an option that is also available. Compliance. These are the things that they're going to be looking for, guys, and it's the same thing that they've been looking for. There's not new things on this list, but the lease agreement being first and foremost. That's the number one thing. I can't tell you how many times I've had a compliance person call me and they're like, well, we just never thought we'd get pulled, so we thought we'd try it. Or the newest one I heard this year was somebody thought they'd throw the local golf course on and just see what happened. I mean, good Lord. So really, this is kind of where we're at. Make sure that you have a lease agreement proving control of the ground. This is huge. This is the first thing they're going to ask for. You can't get by A, you're never going to get to B. So just something to make sure that they have insurable interest in the livestock, and whatever their insurable interest is the limit to the share that they can have on the policy. Now this is where we're going through, and I am going to move through these. I apologize, but these are the scenarios that I was talking about. You can come back, look through them, see what would happen if this happened. Some very good examples. Cannot encourage you enough to look back. This was a good one here. Insured cannot provide verifiable real estate documentation. They put 1,000 acres on the policy. The rancher can only provide 900 acres that he can verify. So premium is going to be due on all 1,000 acres. Like I said, there's no revisions on the PRF policy. You're going to pay the money when you lock it down. You're paying the money. It's just whether you're going to get the indemnity or not. But the indemnity, and as you can see in this example, you're only eligible for 900 acres because that's all you could prove control of. And that's what these examples here are working through, showing if you have a situation, then it'll go back and you can look and see. All of them say 100% of the premium, and then they break down whether you can get an indemnity or not. And so that's kind of working through those. I would encourage you to come back and read these. This is the checklist that the compliance people are going to work through, what they're going to check off. And the very first one is acceptable records. Can you prove control of the ground and ownership of livestock? Like I said, you can't get by A, you're never going to get to B. This is their checklist. This is the PRF documents that are out there on the website under you can go to agent portal, resources, forms, and you can put in PRF. All the forms are out there and updated. If you want to look at additional information, you can go on to RMA's website and you can look up all the provisions that we've talked about today and the information that we went through. If you want to verify it, it is out here and available on RMA's website. Rebating, guys, we talk about this all the time. It's just like drugs. Don't do it. An agent, you can't, as the landowner, say you need to put your PRF policy with this agent. That can't be. If it's in the rental agreement that it has to be with this agent. They can't say an agent says, well, I'll pay your premium, but you have to guarantee me every year I get your November and December payout. Guys, these are things we can't do. If it feels wrong, don't do it. PRF tools, Mark's going to go over the quoter here. It's out there and available. PRF tools, this training suite will be available into this week. With that, I think we are going to switch over and we're going to pull up Easy Rider Pro and we're going to go through the quoter at this point.
All right, guys, this is Mark Driskell again. I'm the marketing rep in Missouri and Eastern Kansas. We're going to go into the new Easy Quote 4 version. If you were on the webinar last year, you would have seen this, so we'll kind of go through it. I am logged in the demo system as an agent, so what I am seeing you should be able to see when you log in as well. The first thing to get in there, typically when we go into our MPCI policy, we go along this blue ribbon here and hit the easy quote button. We don't want to do that. That's going to take us into the current quoter we have for MPCI. We are working on a new version of that as well. But to get into the easy quote 4, we want to go up here to the top left under MPCI and drop that down to easy quote 4. Now this is going to take us into what the new quoting screen is going to look like. You can see right now rainfall is the only thing that we have available. We are working on the MPCI and some other things for this. It's not out there yet. This is so this is going to be for rainfall only. The blue folder here, this is going to go into a new, this would go into a new policy, and that's what we're going to look at to start with. And then we're going to show how to go into an existing policy and make some changes to it as well. So we'll double click on this blue icon here, and this is going to take us into our attributes box. Again, make sure you are in the 2026 quoter, because obviously even though we're still in 2025, we're quoting 2026 PRF. And the attributes box, we're going to go ahead and just select, just like we always have, we're going to go ahead and we're Kansas. I'm going to pick a county of Barber County. And then our crop is going to be pasture, rangeland, forage. Apiculture, that's the B policy. Annual forage, we're past the annual forage sales closing date. So apiculture or PRF would be the only options you have. So we'll pick PRF. It's going to default to the rainfall plan of index. That's just what it is. Now here's the type. This is where we're talking about grazing or haying. And to start this quote, we're just going to look at grazing. There is no irrigation practice. There's no organic type for grazing. The system's going to default to 90% coverage level. We can drop it down and go all the way down to 70%, the lowest coverage level we can buy. This is the trigger. So it's going to default to 90%. It's going to default to the maximum of 150% productivity factor. That's 150% of the county-based value for grass in this county that you're looking at. That can be dropped all the way down to 60% as well. I'm going to show you some tools on how to look at those. It's going to default to 100 acres and 100% share. Change those to whatever you want, guys. If you've got somebody that's got 1,000 acres, maybe he only wants to put 500 in the program, try it on there. The system's going to default to this, so change it to whatever you need. Here's the beginning farmer rancher, veteran farmer rancher. We know now for BFR, it's extended to 10 years, so you get the extra subsidy points. So if you have somebody that qualifies for BFR, select there and it'll reflect the subsidies in the quote. So now we drop down to our grid ID. So if we drop this drop down, it's going to show you all the 12 by 12 mile grids in Barber County, Kansas. You may know the grid, but likely you probably won't. So we can go over here to our grid lookup feature. And when we click on that, it's going to bring us into a satellite view of Barber County, Kansas. So we're going to let it zoom in here for a second. We're in the demo system, so it takes just a little bit longer, and show you how we can search around in here. Okay, so here we go. So it's giving me an overview of Barber County, Kansas, grid overview. You can see the different counties around there. So starting off up here at the top, how can we search? If we know if we have a 578 and we know what the farm track and field number is, just enter that in here and hit search, and it will take you into that field and show you what grid it sits in. If you don't know that, you can also search. If you happen to know the lat and long, great. I don't really know where to find that information, but if you know it, wonderful. You can search from there. You can simply search from their property address to zoom in and find the grid that they're located in. You can search by township. You can also go down below here and we can zoom in. So like if I pan this around and say I get, I pan this around and I get 2 or 3 counties over and I think, man, I'm lost. I don't know where to go. This little red barn with the zoom home is just going to take me back to where I started, back to Barber County, okay? We can zoom in or out right here. So if I wanted to zoom in and see where I'm located at, I could zoom in until I can see the town of Medicine Lodge there. You know where the property owner lives. Just zoom in as tight as you can, find a piece of property that he owns. Here's the select grid. So I know this is the pasture that I own. I can drop a pin in there. It's going to give me the grid that they are in. I can also go down here to the bottom right, this map layers icon, and I can turn on the CLU boundary. Now, I will tell you when you're looking at the satellite imagery behind it, sometimes those numbers get up. I can see where I drop my pin. It's a 30.45 acre field. If I shut off that imagery, sometimes I can see those numbers a little bit better. So if they're a little bit blurry, maybe just once you have your field, if you're not sure if you're in the right field or not, shut that imagery off, and it makes it a little better to see. So we can zoom around, see the grid that we're in. We just didn't hit OK. It brings me into that grid. And now I've got some information for that grid in Barber County, Kansas. So down below that, we're going to kind of ignore this auto intervals and interval percentages for now. These are each of the 2-month intervals that we have on available to us. But down below here, it shows me the net premium based on 90% coverage level and 100% productivity factor for each of the 2-month intervals. So we can see $7.30 for January, February, $6.52, and so on to the right. Down below there, this is the average rainfall that would be expected for 2026 in each one of those grids. So it would have to rain 90% or less of 1.69 inches in January, February before this policy would trigger. And we can follow that on across here. We see May, June is pretty wet. 8 inches of rain is the historical average going into 2026. If we scroll on down, we can kind of see how this policy has reacted and each interval has reacted in the past. And it's going to give us the option to look back 20 years, which the system will default to. We can look 10 years or 5 years back as well. So underneath here, if I'm looking at the 20-year average in January and February, this is telling me that the average index over 20 years is 99.1 is the average index if I added all those up. Total indemnities, if I was to add all the indemnities up per acre for the last 20 years, it would have paid $242.29. Lost performance, this is changed. That used to say rate of return. They have now changed that verbiage to lost performance. You know, this policy really isn't designed on a rate of return basis. We want the information there, so we changed the verbiage to lost performance. But this is the rate of return. So for every dollar I put in a program, I've got $1.66 back over the last 20 years. And it tells me it has paid 12 of the last 20 years is what the indemnity years tell me. And I can follow that across and look at any 2-month interval. Further down below that in red is any year that would have triggered an indemnity. So in 2025, I know that January and February index was 49.6. It was dry last winter. February, March was 11.6. So I can go down and it just tells me in red every interval and every year that would have triggered an index. You can look at that on a little more recent basis. So if I just go in and change this to the last 5 years, it gives me this information, but now it's just living in the now, living in the present. Last 5 years, it's averaged 77.3% index. It's paid 3 out of the last 5 years. The lost performance $1.42. So we can look at that information any way that we want. So now that is the historical information. So now let's go back up here to the center to this auto intervals and the percentages. Now, clearly, if the insured says, I need rain in these months, these are the only months I'm concerned with, we know we can't overlap them, put your coverage where he wants them. Maybe he's not sure, maybe you're not sure. So we have some options here on the auto intervals. So if I select odd, it is going to begin with every odd month, so January, February, month 1, March, April, month 3, and so on down. So the odd numbered months, and it's just splitting me out into 6 different intervals. And it's dividing my coverage up as equally as it can. So we got 17% in the first 4 intervals it's giving me, and then the last 2 it's giving 16%, just so the math works out. We can do the same thing with the even months. Maybe we want to put 5 intervals in there and just select the even months. It divides it out into 20% increments. Now, the neatest feature is the optimizer. So when I drop this down, I've got some options. The optimizer says, if I was to buy this coverage, where would I have the best chance of return, the most indemnities and the most payments over the last 20 years, the last 10 years, or the last 5 years? So if I leave it at 20, the value cap is 50%. Now, as Jeff said earlier, each state has a little bit different maximum. In Kansas, we can only put 60% coverage in any interval. You can't go higher than that. Some states allow 50, some states allow 70. The good thing about this is if I tried to go in here and change this to 80% and I tab off of it, it limits me to 60. It won't even let me put 80% in. So the system's smart. Where this typically comes into play is a guy says, maybe I don't want to put more than 30% in any one interval. So I can change this to 30 so that my coverage is spread out a little bit further and I can stay on 20 years. I can optimize this. And now it says over the last 20 years, here would have been the best way to place my coverage in order for the highest rates of return or loss performance over the last 20 years. I can change this to 10 years and notice it'll change the coverage maybe around a little bit. And I can look at 5 years and it will change the coverage around a little bit there again. So it's giving me the latest 5 years, the best places to place my coverage. So however you guys want to look at it, it's just an easy way to get through it. So once you've selected that and you're good with your decisions, go down and hit save at the very bottom. Now it brings us into kind of the full farm view. Up along the top here, we'll kind of start over to kind of in the middle of add. So if I need to go in and add another practice, for example, I would just go in, hit the big plus sign. It's going to bring me back to the attributes box. We're just going to quickly add in a haying type. So I will select haying as my type. Now I've got practices irrigated or non-irrigated. So we're going to say it's non-irrigated, and we're going to say it's non-organic. We're going to leave the factors alone. We're just going to select another grid. And we're going to optimize it. Let's say this one, we're going to optimize it 10 years, and we'll just leave the value cap at 50%. Hit save. And now I've created two different practices. I've got grazing and I've got haying. I've got two different intervals. So I've got that over here. Now far right is telling me I've got 200 acres on the quote. Total coverage for both practices is $31,159 with a net premium of $35.53. Okay. Now these columns, you can move these around. So maybe you want to see net premium before gross premium. You can just move that gross premium over to the far right, and now it just switched the order of the columns. You can do that, play around with those as much as you want. If you decide that, man, I've just really messed this up and I want to go back to the beginning, just drop this grid preferences down and hit restore default, and it will go back to what we started at. If you really like what you did, you can save the layout, and so your future quotes will be that way, so you don't have to do it every time. Maybe you have a lot of different grid IDs and you want to filter it down a little bit. You can do that, and you can say, okay, I want to filter this down by just the different grid IDs. And so if I go into the grid ID column, hit this little filter button, it's going to let me select just maybe the grid I want to look at. So this policy small, only 2 grids, no big deal, but you can filter this down a little bit. And then if you get all that down and you just want to go back to the start, you can hit this clear filters icon. This export to Excel. So basically, if I wanted to bring this to an Excel spreadsheet, be able to email this to somebody, have it sitting on my desktop without having access to the internet, I can do that. I've already done the export, so I'm going to go down here below, and I'm going to look at this. So open that up, and this is what it would look like. Not super clean, but the neat thing about this is I can go down here to the bottom. I can't adjust the productivity factors from here, but I can go down and I can adjust the different coverage levels. So at 90%, we notice here what the different payouts are on the indemnities, what the loss performance is and those type of things. Net premiums are, if I change this to 85%, you can see up here, it changes my net premium, changes the payouts and so forth. So just kind of a neat way to save this. If you want to, feel free to do that. Let's get back over to our quote. Now, you'll notice this historical index is grayed out. That's because I don't have any unit, nothing selected down here. So if I just pop on a line down here, I've highlighted February, March. Now you'll see I have the historical index window opened up here. Now I can click on it. What this is telling me is I want to be able to go back in and show how this policy would have reacted in the past. So when I click historical index, I have grazing and February, March selected. On the left-hand side, that is all it's looking at. It's just looking at grazing and February and March and showing how this would have paid out indemnities per acre and those type of things, and the loss performance over the last 20, 10, or 5 years. Over on the far right, which is what I like to look at, is how this entire policy, all the intervals, both practices of grazing and haying, how would this have worked if I'd been able to buy this policy using today's information, rate, premium, county-based value, basically just backcasting this into any prior year to show him how would this have looked had I bought it. So I can go back and I can say, okay, in 2024, had you have bought this policy, sir, it would have paid you $8,474, paid you 2.39 rate of return. We can see what our net premium was. You can go back and show any year that you want to show. So maybe I go back and say, okay, well, 22, we know 22 was a pretty dry year. Well, it paid $7,924. So go back and show them as many years as you want. You know, maybe pick a year that you knew it rained a lot. Don't always want to show them just the good. So 2019, paid 22 bucks. This is an insurance policy, not an insurance promise. It's not going to pay every year, regardless of what anybody may tell you. There are years it's not going to work and years it are. It's a historical policy. So you can show them as many back years as you want. Once you're done with that, just hit the clear historical index and it just takes us back to where we started. This include in progress. I would always highlight that because I'm going to show you in a report here in a second. And if we don't include that on there, it's not going to give us any current information for September and October. We're not through those intervals yet, but I can tell you based on today's rainfall, what those indexes are looking at, as long as we have this include progress selected. A little further right than that, if you want to go in and you think the guy's going to buy the policy, you can add his policyholder information in here. That way, if we want to do the application from here, it's all going to be pre-filled in there. You can add the agency information in there as well, and it just keeps you from having to handwrite anything in. This is all under this home screen here, okay? Under the documents to the right of that, now we can get into some of our reports. All right, the full farm report, when I drop that down, I've got three options. Full farm is just going to give us totals. I can look at any coverage levels, one up or one down. In this case, I selected 90%. So it's only going to give me one level down. I can customize what levels I want to look at. We'll click on OK. And that's going to bring me into a full farm report based upon totals. Here's my grid. Here's my grazing practice. It shows all the intervals and the percentages I have, and it just gives me totals. So total per acre would be $51.03 for all, everything combined together. 85% coverage level, drop it down to 48 bucks. And here's my hang totals. So this is how the policy would react in totals, and it breaks it down for you like that. If you want to look at it with just a little more detailed information, I can close out of that. And I can go down to the full farm product summary. This is going to break it down only looking at the current level of coverage that I selected of 90%, but now it breaks it down into each different interval, shows you my coverage I put in there. So 30% of 100 acres is 30 acres. It shows me what my per acre coverage is. It shows me what my net premium per acre is for each different interval. So this just breaks it down a little bit further. The full farm report is totals. This breaks it down by interval and shows you the net premiums and those type of things in there. So a couple of good reports, and you can save those, email them, print them off, whatever you want to do to keep for future reference. Also below that, now this is the productivity factor comparison. This is what I talked about before. So the productivity factor comparison, we know we can go up to a maximum of 150% down to a minimum of 60% in increments. We're going to look at 10% increments. The key to this one is it's only going to be able to show you 6 columns at a time. So I would just run this, if you want to look at all of them, maybe run it a couple different times so that you have them there. It's a little bit easier. I can also look at different coverage levels. Again, we'll select one down from there, and we're just going to step it in 10% increments and go from 100 to 150. And now we can kind of see what it does to the premium. And that's what we're looking at here. We know if we max this policy out, it's $51.03 per acre of coverage at $5.65 per premium, for net premium. If I back it off all the way to 85% and 100% of the productivity factor over here to the left, it's only $3 and a penny an acre. But my coverage is $32.13. So we can just show them what the productivity factor does, because a lot of times the guys say, man, I'm comfortable spending $4. I really don't want to spend $5.50. So, the trigger, the lower the trigger is, the fewer chances you're going to have for a payout, because it just has to rain that much less, than normal. So I like to keep the trigger as high as possible, but, productivity factor is a way to back the coverage off a little bit, keeping the trigger higher. And you can find, maybe he says, okay, here's 85% at 140% of the productivity. I'm good with $44.98 an acre and $4.21 a premium. So you can just kind of look through there and see what best fits for him. So a couple of reports you can run there. The index history report, this is just looking at the that information we found on the first attribute screen. This is just putting it in a report. So it shows you what the average rainfall is, shows all the history back 20 years. Down below here is where I was talking about when we had that include estimated historical on there. I can see now, even though September, October is not done, it's running at 75.5% for the grid that I'm looking at in Barber County, Kansas. And here would be the estimated payout. And then October, obviously, we're only 14 days into October, but it's really dry, 6.2%, and would be paying 47.51. So this will update daily as long as you have that historical index where we over here where we talked about before. As long as it's include progress is highlighted. If I don't highlight that when I'm in documents, it's not going to show me anything for when I go back into this historical. Now it's not showing anything for September and October down here. So like I say, if you don't see that, that's fine. However you want to look at it, but just know turn that estimated on, and that will give you the information there. The estimated rainfall. This is the report if you want to be able to give him and look at what the estimated rainfall, what the average is for each interval. Here's the coverages that I have selected. And over here is that what we looked at on that first screen, just the average historical rainfall. Obviously, we're in 2026. Nothing's happened yet. Once we got into the first interval and got that through, the payment factors will start showing up for each of those coverage levels that I would want to quote. Okay. The application. So if I get everything filled out there from that other screen, I showed you how to put the policyholder information in there. If I wanted to print this application off, I've already got the quote done. Most of this information will be filled out here at the top. I can simply save this, email it, print it off. It's going to be pre-filled with the information that I already elected from the attribute screen. So a way to print that application off. If I go back over here to the home screen, I can also do a create temp policy here. And when I click that, this looks just like it does when we create a temp policy for MPCI in the system. So we can create our temp policy from here as well. Okay, so that is pretty much everything I wanted to show you from how to create a new one. Now we're going to go in and open up an existing policy and just show you a couple of quick things in there that may help you out. And to open up a new quote, you've got a couple of options. You can hit this little folder here or hit the plus folder there. It's going to take me back to where I started at. But instead of, I want to go to I want to open up a policy. Now you can search up here by, if I just clicked on that, I can search it and search, by policy number. You can go on there, put that in. You can see it's going to keep track of the most recent policy you've looked at. I've got Jeff Mark Cattle Company. I pulled it up and looked at it earlier, so I don't have to search for it. I'm going to double click and open that policy up. And now this is going to show me what my 2025 policy rolled into the 2026 crop year. Okay. Keep note over here, net premium of 2507, coverage of 32,412 bucks. I've got 541 acres, so I can adjust this any way I want to. Okay, first off, I'm going to go in here and just go into this first grazing grid, open up January, February. If I needed to adjust any acres, I could adjust acres from here. If I needed to change those things, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to optimize the policy. Here's what we had elected in 25, but maybe I want to go in and say, okay, I want to look at this based on the last 5 years, optimize it, save it. Now it's made some changes. You noticed I can go down here and do the same thing. If I needed to adjust acres, I'm going to optimize this over the last 5 years as well. Save it. I'm going to do the same thing on this next one. Just let the system calculate it and see if it can guess better than I did. Optimize that. And we'll just leave this last one alone just for sake of time. But there I've made changes to the policy. You can notice over here now my net premium went down to $23.77. I still got the same amount of coverage, less $1. I've made these changes to the policy. I have all the same options for running reports and everything as I did now, but maybe this is what I want to do. I can hit this update policy button. And if I hit yes, it's going to update this policy with an Easy Writer Pro and make the changes in the system in Easy Writer Pro that I just made in the quoter. So saves you a bunch of time. Jenny has a video out there from last year on how this works. We brought this out the annual Forage there a few years ago, and now it works in PRF as well. So you can update the Easy Writer Pro from the quoter. So a great way to save a little bit of time on there. The last thing I'm going to show you, that's everything in the quoter. If there's no questions, put them in chat. If there are, we'll open this up here in just a little bit. But that's really all I wanted to show you on the quoter. There are a couple of reports I want to show you with an Easy Rider Pro. So I'm just going to go back to the dashboard. I'm going to go here to Report Center. Now, you'll notice that I have the estimated rainfall and the PRF indemnity reports pulled up. If you don't have those saved, that's fine. Just go to search reports. And if I just type in you got to type first, PRF, hit enter, it brings me up all of the PRF reports that I had. So I had both of these saved. So if I want to save that to favorites, it would go in there and just hit add favorite. I've already got these two saved. If I wanted to take them out of favorites, you can do that as well. And now I can click on here. These are the estimated rainfall and the potential indemnity reports. So I can go in here. We're in 2026, so nothing's happened. I would need to be in 2025, but I can go in and I can select my agency and I can pick an interval and I can see what the estimated indemnities would be. You know, we know that a couple days after the interval ends, we have the estimated information in there. It takes RMA, 60 days, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter to get that information officially out. So again, this just is an estimate, but I can tell them what it would pay. You can look at your entire book of business. You can look at it on a per policy basis as well. And that's the potential indemnity report. The other one is the estimated rainfall. And there I can kind of see where we're at, in progress, just like we looked at in the quarter that, the historical showing us where we are at to date. This is what this did. So I can look at my state, I can look at the grid and the interval code and see where we're at to date with the rainfall amounts and see what our indemnities are or what our indexes are. With that, those are the only things that I had to show you in Easy Rider Pro. Are there questions on the quoter report, something you were hoping to see in there? I know it was kind of a review of last year, but if there's something you were hoping to see, now would be the time to put those in chat. How to optimize it again? Okay, so basically to optimize it again here, we just went into, I'm just going to open up, like I said, I can open up the attributes box from here, from the edit button up here at the top, or I can simply double click on one of the lines down below. And here in the middle under auto intervals is the optimizer. And you can optimize this based on 20 years, 10 years, or 5 years. And like I say, you can leave the value cap at 50%. If you can bump it up to 60, as I showed you earlier. You can't go over 60. It'll know by state the maximum you can put in there. And there may be times that it may say, if you left it at 50, it may say, hey, here are the two best intervals to put it in. It may just break it up 50-50. Each situation is going to be a little bit different. Why you would lower this down is that maybe you would go, okay, I don't want to put 50%. I don't want to be that heavy in just two intervals. I want to spread it out into 4. So if I put 25% in there, I know it's got to spread it out into at least 4 different intervals. So that is the optimizer feature. Okay. So here, like I say, again, the optimizer is great. If if you want to use that, but again, the insured knows best. So if I just reset this, I can go in and I can say, okay, I think that, I'm smarter in the system. I'm going to delete this out of here and I want 20% in January and February. I've got to take some of these out because it won't let me overlap it. So I'm just going to delete these out. And I can say, okay, I want 20% in April, May. I want 40% in July, August. And now it's telling me I'm at 80 and I'm going to put 20% over here in October, November. And save it. So now it brings in there. So you don't have to use the optimizer. This is just a feature. If you don't know, if you want the system to calculate for you where your best chance of receiving an indemnity over the course of history, we're looking behind us. The 8 ball is not magic. So what we've got going forward, we don't know. But this is just looking behind us. Had we have bought this policy in the past, the optimizer is just saying, here's where it would have paid the greatest. But you can put anything in there you want. And you can pick as few as 2 intervals or as many as 6. Just kind of look through the questions here and see if there's anything else.
Okay, one of the questions here, just to keep myself from typing, we're going to answer a few questions here. Hang on 1 second. Good thing is we got a lot of questions. Okay, here we go. For some of my insureds, there are missing intervals in the PRF potential indemnity report. So the potential indemnity report shows everything right up until RMA finalizes the data. And then once RMA finalizes it, if you did not have a loss, it will no longer show up on the potential indemnity report. Only losses stay there. So for Carla's question, that is why you're not seeing them once RMA finalizes the data. If they didn't have a loss, it goes away.
So the historical index, okay, so that the question was if the historical index is grayed out. So when I first went in and saved this, if I don't have one of these intervals highlighted, you'll see up here at the top, historical index is completely grayed out. But as soon as I click on one of the intervals, now it's got that option to do it. So if you see something that's grayed out, it just means, like I say, you don't have that selected. So that's the key is when you're right, when you first go in here, it's going to bring you into this full farm look, but it's not going to show you, exactly what it is until you click on one of those. Let's see what questions we have here. Previous quarter showed a policy level rate of return.
I'm answering that one.
Yep. And so when we went in here to the loss performance, that's what we're looking at. I'm gonna open this back up. Excuse me. So down here now, this column used to say rate of return. Now it says loss performance. Again, they just changed the verbiage on there. Like I say, RMA, the policy is not designed to be a profitability, piece for somebody. And so they felt like rate of return maybe was, pushing it that way. So it's the same information. They just changed the verbiage.
RMA's not liking the way this policy is being promoted. It's showing up in real estate ads and things like that. And so they're kind of pushing back against that. With that, we have reached our time limit, and I apologize if we didn't get your question answered. Certainly reach out to your marketer or your underwriter, and we will work on getting your question answered. It wasn't that we had a great response today. I am sorry once again for the starting just a little bit late. I do apologize for that, but with that, we are going to stop the recording, and we will get these out here by the end of the week. Get this presentation out to you. And once again, like I said, if we didn't get your question answered, reach out to us, reach out to your marketer underwriter. We will go over the question and we will answer it. We've just kind of reached our limit for today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your business, and thank you for getting on the meeting with us today.